Welcome to another church, not church, world history class. World history class. And we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to start at what civilization meant in Sumeria. Sumeria. Let us pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the participants in this course. Thank you for the system you have made available so that this course could be made possible to people in far-flung areas. I pray that you bless them, cover them, protect and preserve them. Bless me, protect me, keep me, and use me to your glory. Amen. Sumer's achievements illustrate the elements of civilization outlined in the prologue. Sumerian society emerged from an agricultural society with isolated cities. It is not easy to pinpoint the date at which civilization emerged from pre-civilization. Some historians seek a bare bones definition. Civilization had greater economic surpluses than other forms of society. This was certainly true of Sumer, which boasted a rich agriculture capable of supporting a minority of specialist workers plus priests and government officials. The initial Mesopotamian civilization also can be used to flesh out a more elaborate definition, which other historians prefer. First, Sumerian civilization generated a clearly defined state or government, replacing the much more loosely organized communities of previous agricultural societies. Second, civilization involved the creation of cities beyond scattered individual centers such as Jericho. The economy remained fundamentally agricultural, and at least 80% of all people still lived in the countryside, as was true in all civilizations until 200 years ago. But the cities were crucial in promoting trade, more specialized manufacture, and the exchange of ideas. At the same time, cities depended on a well-organized regional economy that could provide food for urban areas and on a government capable of running essential services such as court system to handle disputes. So you're going to find that somehow the person with the greater skill, intelligence, abilities, and so on, will emerge to become that central leader, part of the central leadership. Nevertheless, writing is a revolutionary technology. Writing here is referred to as a technology. Societies with writing can organize more elaborate records, including the lists essential for effective taxation. Writing is a precondition for most formal bureaucracies, which depend on standardized communication and the ability to maintain documentation. Societies with writing can record data and build on past discoveries, thus producing a more elaborate intellectual life. For example, it is no accident that with writing an early civilization such as Mesopotamia began to generate more formal scientific knowledge. Societies before the development of writing typically depended on poetic sagas to convey their value systems. The poetry was designed to aid in memorization. With writing, the importance of sagas such as the Gilgamesh epic continued, but the diversity of cultural expressions soon increased, and other kinds of literature supplemented the long rhymed epics. Those elaborate stories. They could write them. Writing also promotes trade and manufacturing. Sumerian merchants used writing to communicate with their trading partners in places such as India. Written records help preserve manufacturing knowledge. One of the first recorded use of Sumerian writing was to transmit a beer recipe. Writing also created new divisions within the population of early civilizations. Only a small minority of people, priests, scribes, and few merchants, had time to master writing. The farmer, the one with the hoe, didn't have time for that. Finally, of course, civilization in the Middle East pioneered in the invention of writing. Some historians and anthropologists urge against focusing too much on the development of writing. We now appreciate the sophistication societies can attain without writing, and we consider the distinction between hunting and gathering and agricultural societies as more fundamental than that between oral and literate societies. Is that so? There is often confusion between defining a society as a civilization and assuming that civilization produces a monopoly on higher values and controlled behavior. Civilization is not necessarily progress. In the first place, civilization brings losses as well as gains. As the Middle East moved toward civilization, distinction based on social class and wealth increased. This was clearly the case in Sumer, where social structure ranged from slaves who were treated as property to powerful kings and priests. Civilizations typically have firmer class or caste divisions and greater separation between ruler and ruled than simpler societies. Civilizations often create greater inequality between men and women than non-civilized societies do. Many early civilizations, including those of the Middle East, went to considerable pains to organize the supposed inferiority of women on a more structured basis than ever before, treating women as the property of fathers or husbands. Furthermore, non-civilized society may be well regulated and have interesting, important cultures. Some societies that were eager to avoid anger and aggression in human dealings, such as several Eskimo groups, were not part of the civilization until recently. In contrast, many civilized societies, including Sumerian society, value aggressive behavior and count warlike qualities as virtues. Some non-civilized societies treat older people cruelly. Some non-civilized. Others display respect and veneration. A civilized society does not always enhance the human capacity for restrained, polite behavior or an interest in the higher values of life. Civilizations do not even clearly promote human happiness. Well, civilization based on those and that kind of a definition, the capacity to produce surpluses would would not put emphasis on being polite and being restrained and being, controlled. But that, of course, that is why I said earlier that civilization is so difficult to be defined. It's almost undefinable. You can describe it. But civilization, from my standpoint, should include politeness. respect for one another because you're polite and you're civilized, you're developed, you have given up, or you're different from those who are warlike and quarrelsome and selfish and rude. If those virtues are not a part of civilization, then civilization is not what I is not something to be grasped. However, the development of civilization did generate new technological and political capacities, and increasingly elaborate and diverse artistic and intellectual forms. In this limited sense, the term civilization has a meaning and legitimately commands the attention of most historians because of the power and splendor civilizations could attain. They tended to spread as other societies came under their influence or deliberately tried to imitate their achievements. However, early civilizations spread slowly because many peoples had no contact with them and because their disadvantages, such as greater social inequality, might have seemed repellent. Later Mesopotamian civilization often was unstable as one ruling people gave way to another invading force. The regions shows a geographic framework for this progress. The Sumerians themselves, invaders of the fertile river valleys, did not set up a sufficiently strong and united political force to withstand pressures from outside, particularly when other peoples of the Middle East began to copy their key achievements. We're going to look at the Akkadian Empire, and that is, it might not be considered Sumerian, but it's within the Fertile Crescent. And they did impact one another. Shortly after 2400 BCE, a king from a non-Sumerian city in Mesopotamia, Akkad, conquered the Sumerian city-states and inaugurated Akkadian Empire. Here one king controlled a fairly large region while maintaining many Sumerian cultural and economic forms. This empire soon sent troops as far as Egypt and Ethiopia. His first ruler, Sargon, and these are you call another name for them is Assyrians. Sargon I is the first clearly identified individual in world history. He unified the empire and integrated the city-states into a whole. He also added to Sumerian art a new style marked by the theme of royal victory. Professional military organization expanded because Sargon maintained a force of 5,400 troops. So now again bureaucracy steps in because they had to put systems and measures in place to collect taxes and food items and so on to feed the troops because they are professional troops. They were always in training. Extensive tax revenues supported these operations, of course. The Akkadians were the first people to use writing for more than commercial and temple records, producing a number of literary works. Sargon's daughter, Enheduanna, high priestess of the gods Nana and An left behind the first works of literature whose authorship can be attributed to a specific individual, two hymn cycles praising the gods and temples of Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire lasted only 200 years and then was overthrown by another invading force. By this time, around 2000 BC, kingdoms were springing up in various parts of the Middle East, and new invading groups added to the region's confusion. A civilization derived from Sumerian culture. The Babylonian, spread more widely in the Middle East. This was the context in which Gilgamesh was first written down. The Babylonian Empire around 1800 BCE. The Babylonian Empire arose and again unified much of Mesopotamia. Large cities testified to the wealth and power of this new empire. The Babylonian Empire was headed by Hammurabi, one of the great rulers of early civilized history. Hammurabi set up an extensive network of officials and judges and maintained a separate priesthood. He also codified the laws of the region to deal with a number of criminal, property, and family issues. At the same time, Sumerian cultural traditions were maintained and elaborated. The famous Hammurabi Code thus built on earlier codification by Sumerian kings. The document box shows what kind of problems the code sought to regulate through laws. Babylonian culture did more than elaborate power. A poem expressed the continued pessimism and sobriety of the dominant beliefs. I look about me and see only evil. My troubles grow and I cannot find justice. I have prayed to the gods and sacrificed, but who can stand the gods in heaven? Who knows what they plan for us? Who has ever been able to understand a god's conduct? Finally, the Babylonian scientists extended the Sumerian work in astronomy and mathematics. Scholars were able to predict lunar eclipses and trace the paths of some of the planets. Babylonians also worked out useful mathematical tables and an algebraic geometry. They could figure out areas and volumes for many shapes, devise squares, and compound interest. The modern 60-minute hour and 360-degree circle arose from the Babylonian system of measurement applied to earlier Sumerian numbering systems. Indeed, of all the successors of the Sumerians, the Babylonians constructed the most elaborate culture. Although their rule lasted only about 200 years, the Babylonians expanded commerce and a common cultural zone, both based on growing use of cuneiform writing and a shared language. During the empire itself, new government strength showed in both the extensive legal system and the opulent public buildings and royal palaces. The rooftop gardens of trees and vines of one king dazzled visitors from the entire region. The Babylonian Empire fell by about 1600 BCE. Middle East society had become so prosperous that it was beginning to attract recurrent waves of attack from nomadic peoples pressing in from Central Asia, and few geographic barriers impeded the incursions. The invading Hittite people, one of the first of the Indo-European groups to enter in from Central Asia, set up an empire of their own. The Hittites soon yielded, and a series of smaller kingdoms disputed the region for several centuries between about 1200 and 900 BCE. Hammurabi, as a king of Babylon, united Mesopotamia under his rule from about 1800 to 1750 BCE. His law code, the earliest such compilation still in existence, was discovered on a stone slab in Iran in 1901 CE. Not a systematic presentation, it was a collection of exemplary cases designed to set general standards of justice. The code provides vital insight into the nature of social relations. Now, I wanted to include a paragraph in your reflection on the Law of Hammurabi. 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 This is very significant because I have done some amount of law courses, and one of the things that I've discovered is that modern laws everywhere have elements of the law of Hammurabi, elements of it. So it was fundamental, for someone in that time and age to achieve. It's a major achievement. We're going to be looking at ancient Egypt. Unlike Mesopotamia and the Middle East, where a river valley civilization ultimately spread throughout an entire region, Egyptian civilization from its origins to its decline focused on the Nile River and the deserts immediately around it. So Egypt is somewhat encased by the river Nile and the desert. The Nile's steady flow, marked by predictable flood surges, also gave a more optimistic cast to Egyptian culture, for it could be seen as a source of never-failing bounty to be thankfully received, rather than as a menacing cause of floods with Mesopotamian rivers. Farming had been developed along the Nile by about 5000 BCE, but some time before 3200 BC, economic development accelerated, in part because of growing trade with other regions, including Mesopotamia. Wow. For Egypt, I can understand that they could trade well. You didn't have people from Mesopotamia did not have to cross. All right, the Nile to go to Egypt, but they had to cross the Euphrates and might have to cross the Tigris because they traded with India. I would love to know, and it has been glossed over. And that's why you have to have historiography, because some persons left out something that another person would like to know, and so you have to, in writing that the history over, you would include this new thing. This acceleration was the basis for the formation of regional kingdoms. Unlike Sumer, Egypt moved fairly directly from pre-civilization to large government units without passing through a city-state phase, although the first Pharaoh, King Narmer, had to conquer a number of petty local kings around 3100 BC. Egypt always had fewer problems with political unity than Mesopotamia did, in part because the unifying influence of the course of the Nile River. By the same token, however, Egyptian politics tended to be more authoritarian and centralized for city-states in the Mesopotamian style. Though often ruled by kings, also provided the opportunity for councils and other participatory institutions. By 3001 BCE, Narmer, king of southern Egypt, conquered the northern regional kingdom and created a unified state 600 miles long. This state was to last 3,000 years. Despite some important disruptions, this was an amazing record of stability. Even though the greatest vitality of the civilization was exhausted by about 1000 BCE. During the 2000-year span in which Egypt displayed its greatest vigor, the society went through three major periods of monarchy: the Old, the Intermediate, and the New Kingdoms, each divided from its successor by a century or two of confusion. In all its phases, Egyptian civilization was characterized by the strength of the pharaoh. The pharaoh was held to be descended from gods, and to him was attributed the power to ensure prosperity and control the rituals that ensured the regular flow of the Nile and the fertility derived from irrigation. Soon the pharaoh came to be regarded as a god. Much Egyptian art was devoted to demonstrating the power and sanctity of the pharaoh. An extensive bureaucracy was recruited from the landed nobles. And trained in writing and law. Governors were appointed for key regions and were responsible for supervising irrigation and arranging for the great public works that became a hallmark of Egyptian culture. Most Egyptians were peasant farmers, closely regulated and healthily taxed, because the city government was elaborate and had to be supported. Given the importance of royal rule and the belief that pharaohs were gods, it is not surprising that each of the main periods of Egyptian history was marked by some striking kings. Early in each dynastic period, that is, where a new family line took power, leading pharaohs conquered new territories, sometimes pressing up the Nile River into present-day Sudan, and once even moving up the Mediterranean coast of the Middle East. Late in Egyptian history, one pharaoh, Akhenaten, tried to use his power to install a new one-god religion, replacing the Egyptian pantheon. This was a dramatic assertion of royal authority, but his effort failed against a powerful priesthood, and the controversy distracted him from military affairs, leading to some difficult wars. Historians debate whether his vision was simply a fascinating historical accident or has some larger significance about impulses toward a new kind of religious framework. It was to commemorate their greatness that many pharaohs built the pyramids to house themselves and their family and staff after death, commanding work crews of up to 100,000 men to haul and lift the stones. The first great pyramid was built about 2600 BCE. The largest pyramid followed about a century later, taking 20 years to complete and containing 2 million blocks of stone, each weighing 5.5 tons. Mm. These monuments were triumphs of human coordination, for the Egyptians were not particularly advanced technologically. They even lacked pulleys or other devices to hoist the huge slabs of stone that form the pyramids. Recent aerial discoveries reveal that early Egyptians built at least one roadway to the stone quarries, but roads were not used during the age of the pyramids. Masses of workers rolled stones over logs and onto Nile barges before assembling the massive monuments on the river's bank. Some scholars have seen fundamental links between Egypt's stable, centralized politics and its fascination with an orderly death, which gave rise to massive funeral monuments and the preservation through mummification. When we come back, we are going to look at Egyptian ideas and arts. Do your reflection and email me. God bless you. Until we meet again.